Alright folks, so this video is being made by request. A follower reached out to me and said, you know, Dag, you've talked a lot about landings and you used the word stabilized approached a lot. Could you do a video basically on what I mean by when I'm saying is stabilized approached? This person's been flying about a year and a half, started with some park flyers and is actually getting into gliders right now, but wants to get into warbirds too. So let's kick this off. So if you're new to my channel, welcome. My nickname's Dag. I've been doing model aviation since the very late 70s, which makes me an old fart, but I think I'm one of the cool old farts because I like to embrace technology and doing cool stuff. But my passion is giant scale model aircraft. I am building an ultralight, and I'm going to do a few of my updates on my ultralight on my channel. I've had a couple of people say, so are you ditching RC for ultralights? Nope, I'm not. I've been doing this ultralight for about 3 years, and ever so often I do an update. I am going to do more updates on the ultralight because I'm trying to get it done by March next year. But my passion has been giant scale electric airplanes. The ultralight has a 340cc Kawasaki engine in it, so it is petrol. But my radio control life has been giant scale RC. And I created this channel to try to give you, to share with you everything I've done to have success. I don't like to speculate. I don't like to try to think how somebody else is flying or what's going on. I like to give you just the facts of what's worked for me, because the internet is full of so many people, in my opinion, that are full of crap, and they like to just chime in, and a lot of the times the stuff they're giving you is not very accurate. So with that said, so as you know, I love to share, or I like to use 3D models as a way to illustrate a lot of the stuff I do. Before I get too far into this, I want to talk about one of the manufacturers I've been partnering with. They're incredible. RTL Fasteners. If you need bolts, nuts, blind nuts, lock nuts, kind of specialty fasteners, they pretty much have it. So if you go to the website and you buy more than $25 a product, you'll get 25% off if you use the top secret code DAG25. So spend more than 25 bucks and get 25% off. Okay? So I want you to imagine for a minute that we have a Draggy biplane. It could be electric, it could be gas, could be a slope soarer. Forget that, because I'm going to be talking about power here. But let's just say most of my biplanes to fly level needed around 40% power. Okay, just to fly level, because they're draggy. And a lot of times you don't overpower it if it's scale. I mean, I know people that want to put 300 watts per pound on a scale airplane. I think, personally, that's a little bit overdoing it. But we all know that if we pull the power off, the plane is going to descend, okay? There's no such thing as an airplane that will never land if you shut the engine off. Okay, now, if you got a glider and you get into thermals, whatever, but sooner or later it's going to land. I've had a lot of people, I've taught about 100 or 101 people how to fly, and I've had people say, I just can't get the plane to land. And the problem is that A, they don't know how to slow the airplane down, and B, they sometimes have their idle, if it's a glow or a gas engine, too high. So if you've got your idle too high, the plane may never slow down enough for you to really do what I call a stabilized approach. Okay, and I'm going to describe that in a minute. But I want you to understand that, you know, I'm also a full-scale pilot. And one of the first things they teach you is that your power is for altitude, and your attitude is for airspeed. So if you ever listen to an aircraft carrier coming on board of an aircraft carrier, I'm sorry, if you got an airplane landing on an aircraft carrier, you will hear the person on the radio saying power, power, you're high, power. Power means they're low. They got to add power to control their descent or their altitude. Okay? The same thing with a model airplane completely applies. So if you have your plane, now earlier we talked about 40% to fly level. If you put your nose down without changing the power, your airspeed goes up. Okay? So the thing is that if you then put your nose down to the right amount with your engine at idle, you will have what's called a maintained glide speed, or a best glide speed on some airplanes. But what I'm trying to plant in your head right now is once you learn to do all of this in a model aircraft, it becomes second nature. But when you're first learning, there's an awful lot to think about of how an aircraft really flies. Okay, and I'm using as an example right now a really draggy airplane, because if you go up in the air pretty high and bring it to idle, and let's say you go up 100 feet, and you go to idle with a draggy airplane, and you put your nose down, you're going to notice you've got a pretty nose-down attitude to hold that airspeed for your glide to come down. Okay? And I'll talk about a warbird in a minute. But let's say you're flying level, and you've got your motor set at 40%, level flight, and you raise your nose. There may be enough power that you would just keep climbing. But I'll guarantee your airspeed does slow down. The plane will slow down the moment you bring that nose up. Okay? So what I want you to think about is if you are flying along level, pull it to idle, pull your nose up, your plane will slow down until you stall. So this all sounds pretty like RC flying 101. But in the back of your mind, you've got to kind of jockey where your throttle is for your altitude and where your nose attitude is for your airspeed. And since we don't have airspeed indicators, well, most of us don't. I have some telemetry in my planes where I can hear it. But most of us, when the plane's flying straight at us, it's really hard to judge what your airspeed is without a lot of practice and understanding some of the plane kind of talks back to you. If it's a swept wing airplane, it starts to rock the wing. It's getting close to stalling normally. Okay? If it's a straight wing and you're getting slow and you notice the plane just starts to want to fall off a little bit, or you just notice that your controls are starting to disappear when you're moving your thumb, chances are you're approaching a stall. And the thing is, you never want to touch the ailerons when you're getting close to stalling. You only touch the rudder to try to hold that attitude and keep the wings level. The moment you touch your ailerons, you're changing the angle of attack and you're screwing up airflow, and you're just going to stall spin into the ground if you start getting heavy into the ailerons when you're really, really slow. But now what I want to do is talk about a clean airplane. So let's just say you've got a FW-190 and you only need 35% to fly level. Okay? When you drop the gears and flaps, you may need as much as 55%. So that's the airplane getting your level, but you're very dirty. Okay, the plane's getting dirty. Now, you raise the nose, and you are going to climb a little bit if you raise the nose, but you're going to be losing airspeed. So if you're on final and you see your nose high, chances are your plane could be drifting up a little bit. But then when it starts to arc over and starts to come down, if your nose is high, you are approaching a stall. Your airspeed's really slow. If you've got your nose up and you're descending, now, there are some airplanes like 3D airplanes and stuff that you can have the nose really high and be descending, having the power going and all that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about stabilized approaches right now. Okay? Because the best landing is the one that starts with a stabilized approach. Okay? And that normally starts in the downwind, getting your plane configured to land. Okay? But let's say you're at 35%, you're level. Now keep in mind it took 55% to maintain level flight dirty. So now you pull the power back to 35%, you could still be level but descending. Okay? Some warbirds look really scale when you land them this way. But still keep in mind you are, unless you put the nose down, your whatever airspeed you were at Draggy when you pull that power back, the plane is basically, remember, when you use the power for altitude, when you pull the power back, the plane is going to descend. Now, it is slowing, but if you want to control your airspeed, it's with pitch. So one of the things I try to explain to people that are getting into scale warbirds that really want to do picture perfect landings is practice. And first of all, if you don't have a lead sled, you're going to have a lot better chance of really exploring that envelope of the airspeed. If you've got a lead sled, a plane with a really heavy wing load, and it also goes back to the way the leading edge is designed on warbirds. I've seen people sand it where the leading edge is like really pointy. Well, the air will make a really quick decision which way it's going to go between flying and stalling. If you have a really rounded leading edge, it takes a lot longer for that air to decide which way it's going to go. So if you're building a warbird, don't think you're going to make the leading edge pointier to make it go faster, because you're actually going to create a wing that will stall a lot easier than if it's really rounded at the front. Try to build it as scale as possible. But if you're building a kit and it has a really pointy leading edge on like a P40, a P51 Mustang, or a P40, and you want it to have better stall characteristics, round out that leading edge better, okay? But right here, we have 35%, we're descending, we are losing some airspeed. If we don't drop that nose a little bit, that airspeed will come down to the point that then you would use power to control your descent, which is actually the way you should do it in full scale. But with models, it's incredibly hard to know what your airspeed is. Okay? So now, if you just pull it to idle dirty, you're going to lose a lot of airspeed. And if you try to hold altitude being level, you will ultimately stall. So if you had an autopilot and had it fixed in at 100 feet and you pull it back to idle, that autopilot's going to fight to keep that altitude until the plane stalls. Okay? Now, we don't have autopilots, but I'm just throwing that out there for you. Now, if you got 25% and you raise your nose, okay, you're definitely going to burn off airspeed really, really quick. So, sorry guys, I heard something upstairs. My dog's going crazy upstairs. It's late at night. You'd think it would be asleep, but it's playing up there. So, so here is where people might be on a final approach and they think they're low, and instead of adding power, they're pulling their nose up. And that is a real big no-no. So then you think about, okay, if I've got my power at 55 and I'm dirty and I want to land, all I got to do is push my nose down, right? No, you're going to start gaining a lot of airspeed, okay? So there's this balance between finding the right pitch, okay, the right pitch, and the right throttle setting to get a really nice stabilized approach. So the best way I can explain this is both of these airplanes here are my giant scale planes. The one on the top left-hand corner has a 197-inch wing. The one on the bottom is a 188-inch wing. The one on the top left is really draggy. The one on the bottom right is really clean. Even though it doesn't have retractable landing gears, it's still a very clean aircraft. The top left airplane, when I'm landing it, I'm probably holding 40% power all the way down to the point that I'm going to flare out and land. Because it's draggy, it's not overpowered, flies very scale. The one on the bottom right-hand corner, many times you'll see me float and bounce and do 2 or 3 landings. Because it's so clean, it doesn't seem to really want to slow down. And being giant scale and coming toward me, with all the experience I've got, I still find myself not nailing the airspeed on the yellow and blue airplane. And it's kind of embarrassing. So, but I want to tell you something that I've seen an awful lot of people do. And this is where you can get into trouble. And actually, this is where I get into, and I don't mean trouble from crashing. I'm talking about trouble in having what looks like a picture-perfect landing. So many times on my giant scale airplanes, there is a fear factor of me crashing them, even with all the hundreds of hours, or actually that vintage one with the flying wires and everything has over 1,350 flights, I think, on it. But one of the things that this yellow and blue airplane does is it loves to pick up speed when you drop the nose. And many times I will find myself, if I'm flying a right-hand pattern, to be honest, I'm really, really comfortable with it. When I fly left-hand patterns, all of my home clubs and where I fly up at the AMA headquarters normally, the way the wind is blowing, I'm always flying a right-hand pattern. But when I go and start flying, left-hand pattern. When I start flying a right-hand pattern, for some reason, visually, the plane looks different to me and I come in a little bit hotter. Now remember, if you're scared or you think you're behind the curve, it doesn't hurt to come in a little fast if you got plenty of runway to land on. But if you're trying to do a true stabilized, beautiful landing, you've got to practice, and I've said this in my other videos about landing, in the downwind, get the plane configured. Gear down, flaps down, throttle set. In the downwind base, fly the airplane. Don't get it slow. When you're turning base to final, remember the yo-yo thing I've talked about. If you're pulling back on that stick, you're pulling the nose up, which is pulling the airspeed off, so you got to add power. So anytime you're pulling back on the stick, turning base to final, you want to add a little bit of power if you're pulling really hard back on that stick to make sure you're hitting the runway. Well, actually, if you're pulling hard back on the stick, I'd add a lot of power, because most crashes happen base to final, because visually with model airplanes, we don't know the airspeed, and we don't have a stall horn. But what happens is you end up high and you put your nose down. Well, when you're high and you put your nose down, what happens? You start adding power. So when you're diving at the runway, even though you could be at idle, when you go to flare out, you may be having 20 or 30% more energy than you need. So now you're floating down the runway and you land, and then you go back in the air and you land, and everybody says the second landing was the best. Believe it or not, I do it all the time with my yellow and blue airplane. With all of the times I've flown it, it's still embarrassing. Now, if somebody walks up and says, hey, I need you to really nail the landing, then I will, put my brain into some mode where I'm really, really, really paying attention to everything about the airplane. I'm really concentrating. I'm normally doing a little bit longer approach, which sometimes can be dangerous. The farther you are out, the less that you can really understand the depth of the airplane coming toward you. So there's just a lot of things going on, folks, that depending on your airplane, it's just practice and learning. Now, I've seen a lot of people do this. They come in, looks like a perfect approach, and I see their nose start to come up, and their nose is going up, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, don't raise the nose. And what they're trying to do is slow the airplane down. That's what you do with a full-scale airplane. But with a model airplane, when you're slowing it down, you don't know how much it's slowing down. And for all you know, it's slowing down so quick that now you end up in a stall. And believe me, if those wings start to move, use the rudder. Don't touch the ailerons, or you are guaranteed to stall one of the wings. Okay? But when you think about all the landings we see where people come down and they miss where they want to land by 100 feet, that is because they're gaining energy, like I spoke about earlier. When you put that nose down, you really start to gain energy. Even if you're pulling the power back. Now, if it's a really draggy airplane, you might have to, it might be necessity to get that nose way down. Okay, if it's a really, really draggy airplane. Because, how do I say this? A lot of people like to be close to idle when they're descending. I don't. I like my power being around 25, 30%, so that when I round it out, I pull the power back, and I even landed full-scale airplane like this. I flew on a check ride once with an instructor and greased the landing, and the instructor goes, you had a lot of power all the way down to the wheels touching. And I'm like, and I felt like some instructors are crap pilots. Okay, now they know how to fly all turning on a point, and they know how to do power on and power styles. But as pilots, understanding how airplanes work, some instructors suck. And keep in mind, anytime you jerk the power on or off of an airplane, you're changing that configuration instantly. People who want to bring an airplane in and just chop the power, let the airspeed bleed off, lift the nose up, and they bounce like a Cherokee on the ground. I love Cherokees, the Archers and Warriors. And I got to the point you wouldn't even hear the wheels. You just feel the rumble, because I'd actually hold a little bit of power on until the wheels touched the runway, and then I'd pull the power back. Model aircraft is very much the same. I love to hold power all the way to the point my wheels are on the ground, and then I pull it to idle. You look at any of my giant scale airplanes, I've got probably 10 to 15% power minimum when my wheels touch the ground. Now keep in mind, I don't have overpowered airplanes. If you got 300 watts per pound, you probably can't do that, because the airplane would never land. Okay? But really, kind of in closing here, what I want everybody to think about is, if your descent's coming in too fast, you're too low on power. Don't pull the nose up to try to round out that descent, because that just brings off your airspeed. If you see that you're coming in, way too high, or you're going way too far down the runway, get the power back and let the plane start to descend more. It just takes practice, everybody, but it's amazing how many videos I've done on landing, and there's some people out there going, oh, well, landing's easy. Like I've always said, it depends on the airframe, how many times you've flown that airframe. It depends on the weight of the airframe. It depends on your skill levels. It depends on if you're just trying to land. I know a friend of mine, and I'm going to kind of make fun of him a little bit here. I never try to be negative, and he won't care. But I always joke that if he were a full-scale pilot, he'd need 25,000 feet to land, because he has the most unstabilized approaches. He comes in like a X-15, a ballistic missile, and he flies off a really nice airfield that has like 800 feet of runway, and he still sometimes almost hits the fence at the other end of the field. And I'm like, are you landing in this county or what, buddy? But he doesn't hurt airplanes, so I guess no harm, no foul, right? And if you watch my earlier landing videos, I like to throw a paper plate out on the grass and practicing how close I can land at where that paper plate is. Okay, and I actually had to do a little bit of correction on this, because I have a friend or a follower that was doing that and hit the paper plate and flipped the airplane over. It was a Cub. So take two paper plates, put them about 25 yards apart with a fictitious line between the two paper plates, and see how close you can land to that fictitious line. But please, folks, if you're flying a semi-symmetrical wing, a fully symmetrical wing, a heavy wing load, don't practice seeing how slow you can get the airplane. You want to get slow when you're touching down. I know I've gotten a couple people send out comments and email me, oh, I do full stall landings every time. Congratulations, and if that works for you, I think that's awesome. But I hate full stall landings, especially on warbirds or planes with heavier wing loads, because you don't have a stall horn. You don't know at what point that plane's going to quit flying. And if you round out too much and go up 4 feet in the air or 3 feet in the air and then have a full stall, you're going to cartwheel or destroy your airplane. And I've seen that happen a lot in the 30 or 40 or 50, whatever years I've been doing this. It's almost 50. But yeah, folks, that's all I'm trying to do in this video is I try to answer emails when people ask very specific things. And this young man, I've tried to convince him, if you're terrified of flying an airplane, don't fly it. Okay? Just don't fly it. Don't force yourself to fly an airplane you're terrified of. But don't, how do I say this? Don't confuse being terrified with just being nervous of flying a new airframe. Every time I take a new airframe into the air, there is a little bit level of butterflies. Now, if the airplane's taking me 4 years and I'm pissed at it and everything's gone wrong, and I just go out and I always do pre-flights, I always make sure the plane's safe, but then I send that bastard into the air, because at that point I don't care if it flies or crashes, there's probably not many butterflies, okay? Because one of the problems with me is, like my air bike, my ultralight, I had a problem with the engine and had to go to another engine. So basically for 8 months, I abandoned the project because I was pissed at it. That's one way I enjoy this hobby, is I never do something I'm not loving doing. So if I'm working on a project and I get pissed at it, then I move on to another project for 6 months or 8 months or 2 months or whatever. Okay? But if you've built a beautiful warbird, and I'm going to use an example of somebody I've been talking to that wants me to test fly the plane, and we live too far apart, or I would do it. And I don't like test flying planes lately, the last 5 years, for people, because I just don't know how they're built. But this person's built a beautiful electric Zeroli airplane, but the weight is ginormous and and I'm not making fun of this person. It's the most beautiful plane I've seen, at least through pictures. But it is just freaking heavy. Now, is it within the cube wing loading of being a flyable airplane? I completely believe it is. But this person is absolutely like, I'm never going to fly this airplane. And I said, great, you don't have to fly it. Okay? But I'm going to try to figure out how to go visit this person and get this plane into the air, get it completely shaken out for them, let them have the stick and controls, and try to get them used to just doing some normal slow flight with it. And it still terrifies them, then I'm going to tell them to sell the airplane. But I feel pretty confident I could get this person comfortable flying this airplane, even though it is a lead sled. So look, I'm going to shut this down, everybody. As you all know, I've been on this big mission to get kids into the hobby. And here, actually, this was my very first flying, not my first, but this, I bought this type of airplane like 500 years ago when Abraham Lincoln was flying escapements. So the thing is that if you don't know what an escapement is, then you're not an old fart like me. But it was this type of a Gillows plane that was the very first flying model I ever had. It's not, this is new. I got this off Amazon. But, and then these little bitty foam things are really cool. But put one of these in one of your kids' hands and let them start playing with it. Let them take a marker and make it into the whatever genre they want. But get them away from the Grand Theft Auto and some of these other games out there that are teaching people to become mass murderers, okay? So I'm not against video, okay, video games, because there's good simulators that teach you how to fly airplanes out there. But if your 10-year-old kid is learning how to, murder everybody in a mall, that might not be as beneficial to the future of mankind as giving them a glider like this. And look, folks, and I'm dead serious here, if you can't afford this, I know not everybody is in the best of times right now. If you can't afford one of these for your kids, send me an email and your address, and I will send you one of these free. I'm dead serious. So if you can't afford it, now don't be a troll and say, yeah, send me one of these, and then write, Dag's a dipshit. I mean, whoops, sorry for saying bad words. I'm trying to make this good for the kids, but don't write things on the airplane and then show it to me, okay? So, and I'm not going to beep out that word because I hate editing. Yeah, that's it, everybody. So please get kids involved in model aviation. There's physics, there's science, there's math, there's awesome people, except for the male Karens and female Karens that are jerks at some of the clubs. But you need to learn to deal with those too. I always joke that, college doesn't create intelligence. College is what teaches you to grow up, be domesticated. And I never went to college, so I'm not domesticated. But this plane here, folks, you move the wing forward and backwards to control the CG. So if you want it to do loops, or if you want it to kind of fly like a ballistic missile, you move the wing all the way back. You can, basically lightly wet with alcohol and water and move the elevators on it. Or you can actually, I used to cut out the ailerons and put some clear tape on it so I could have ailerons and do barrel rolls. There are so much you can teach a kid with one of these balsa wood airplanes. Now, if you really want to get into space shuttle type crap, I guess you could mount one plane on top of the other. But folks, it's amazing how much fun a kid can have outdoors, in the smog and all the bad air. And I'm kidding. Get them outdoors where there's a blue sky and trees and let them play with one of these. And believe it or not, you can check the CG on this thing and teach a lot of people about how the CG on an airplane works, okay? So it's amazing what you can learn from one of these airplanes. So that's my, I'm done ranting about getting your kids away from being mass murderers. If you want them to be that way, carry on. So thanks for watching my videos, everybody. If you haven't liked and subscribed already, please do it. I'm trying to build my YouTube. Between my Patreon, my YouTube, and some sponsorships, I'm trying to be able to pay for my hobby without taking away from my daughter's college fund. So, and we know my daughter's got to go to college. So that's it, folks. Have an awesome day. Be nice to each other. Get kids into aviation. And lighten up. See you next time. Rock on. Bye.